There's a story you've been told about Japan. Samurai. Shoguns. Centuries of proud isolation. A culture so unique it could only have grown from within. And almost every part of that story is wrong. This video covers 2,000 years of Japanese history, but not the version you already know. We're going to move through the real thing, from a tiny gold seal that a farmer dug up by accident, to a shaman queen who appears in Chinese records but nowhere in Japan's own history books, to the night a group of military rebels nearly stopped the end of World War II. And I'll save the strangest discovery for last, because it changes how you see everything that came before it. The actual story of Japan is a story about connection, to Korea, to China, to India, to Portugal, to the Netherlands, to the United States, and about a country that absorbed all of that while convincing the world it never did. Let's go. We start around 300 BC, when a group called the Yayoi arrived on the Japanese islands, most likely coming through the Korean peninsula. They brought rice farming, bronze tools, and a concept that changed everything, owning land. And here's what that created almost immediately: organized violence over who controlled it. Archaeologists excavating sites like Yashinagari in Kyushu uncovered the ruins of a fortified village surrounded by a moat from the Yayoi period, the oldest and largest remains of this era found on the archipelago. At its peak, the fortified core was home to a ruling elite who controlled the surrounding agricultural villages, and the double moat system and timber palisades were not merely symbolic, they reflect real threats and real military capacity. Watchtowers. Palisades. Burial mounds with bronze weapons inside. This is not a peaceful origin story. Organized warfare existed on these islands centuries before anyone ever heard the word samurai. And the migrants who arrived through the Korean peninsula didn't just bring conflict. They brought ironworking, writing, administrative knowledge, and religious traditions that would shape Japan for the next 1,000 years. Early Japan was built through migration as much as through anything else. Now, around the 3rd century AD, something remarkable happened, and this is where the story gets genuinely strange. A Chinese text called the Weiji, compiled around 297 CE, describes a powerful ruler of a place called Yamatai. According to this record, Himiko was a powerful ruler who lived during the turbulent 3rd century, described as a shamaness who communicated with the gods, practiced sorcery, and remained unmarried throughout her life. Her people believed she had divine powers, and she governed with a mixture of spiritual authority and political shrewdness. She governed in seclusion within a fortified palace complex featuring towers and stockades, attended by 1,000 female servants and a single male intermediary who handled provisions and relayed messages, ensuring few subjects ever saw her directly. Here's the thing though. Himiko ruled for more than half a century as head of the largest chiefdom, traditionally known as Yamatai, until her death in 248, yet no such person appears in the old Japanese literature. Japan's own earliest chronicles, the Kojiki and the Nihon Shoki, simply don't mention her. Historical evidence suggests that Yamatai may have been located either in the Yamato region in south-central Honshu, or in northern Kyushu. Historians still argue about it. Nobody has settled it. And that uncertainty is exactly what makes Himiko so compelling. She's Japan's most important ancient ruler, and Japan itself seems to have forgotten her. Speaking of things that have been deliberately kept from view, there is a tomb in Osaka that is one of the largest burial monuments ever built on Earth. The Daisen coffin measures 486 meters in length and about 36 meters in height, and it is traditionally attributed to Emperor Nintoku, the 16th emperor of Japan. To put that in perspective, its footprint is roughly twice the size of the Great Pyramid of Giza. And almost nobody has been inside it. Access to the mound has been tightly controlled by the Imperial Household Agency, with almost no opportunity for researchers to study the inside. Representatives from 17 academic history and archaeology organizations were invited to visit the keyhole-shaped mound. Escorted by officials from the Imperial Household Agency, it was the first time since the end of the Second World War that scholars had been allowed to visit the sacred site. They did not enter the tomb itself, nor did they bring back any artifacts. We don't know for certain who's buried there. We don't know what's inside. One of the largest structures built by any ancient civilization sits in a modern Japanese city, and it is essentially off-limits. Keep that image in mind, because the pattern of Japan controlling what outsiders are allowed to see runs through this entire story. Now, in the 6th century, something arrived from the Korean peninsula that nearly tore the country apart before it even got started: Buddhism. Its introduction was not a peaceful spiritual awakening. The pro-Buddhist Soga clan went to war against the Mononobe clan, who feared the foreign religion would anger Japan's native gods. The Soga won, Buddhism was established, and the political consequences unfolded for generations. One of those consequences came in the 8th century, when a smallpox epidemic swept through Japan between 735 and 737 and may have killed roughly 1/4 to 1/3 of the entire population. Emperor Shomu, devastated by the scale of the catastrophe, responded with one of the most ambitious religious construction projects in history. The Great Buddha of Nara was consecrated in 752, and the ceremony that dedicated it was led by an Indian monk named Bodhisena, with performers attending from across Asia. Think about that. The most iconic Buddhist monument in Japan was consecrated by an Indian monk, at a ceremony drawing people from across the continent. Japan was never a closed world. It just looked that way from the outside. Around the same time, something was happening inside the Japanese court that would reshape the country's entire literary culture. Formal scholarship was conducted in classical Chinese, which was considered the language of serious men doing serious things. But court women began writing in kana, a phonetic script sometimes called women's hand, and what they produced in that script turned out to be some of the greatest literature in human history. The Tale of Genji, written by Murasaki Shikibu in the early 11th century, is widely considered the world's first novel. It exists because women found a way to write that the formal system hadn't sanctioned. That's the kind of thing that gets left out of the textbook version. Now here's something that sounds like a conspiracy theory but was actually official government policy. For roughly 3 centuries, the real power in Japan didn't belong to the emperor sitting on the throne. It belonged to the emperor who had already abdicated. Under a system called insei, retired emperors could escape the ceremonial restrictions that came with the official role and govern from behind the throne, running a shadow court beside the official one. So Japan had an emperor, and then it had the actual ruler, who was the former emperor, and sometimes a third figure waiting in line. The throne was almost a trap, the real power was in leaving it. And while retired emperors were maneuvering behind the scenes, Buddhist monasteries were doing something even more aggressive. Powerful temples maintained private armies of armed monks, and when they wanted political concessions, they would carry sacred portable shrines directly into the capital. Nobody dared attack a sacred shrine. The government would capitulate rather than be seen as the force that violated holy objects. Religious authority had been converted into a very effective form of political pressure, and it worked repeatedly. By the 13th century, Japan faced a threat from the outside that no internal maneuvering could handle. The Mongols came twice, in 1274 and 1281, with fleets that dwarfed anything Japan could put on the water. And the standard story is that a divine wind, a kamikaze, destroyed both fleets and saved the nation. That part is true. Typhoons did devastate the Mongol ships. But the storms didn't work alone. Japan had constructed coastal stone walls, launched raids on the anchored fleets, and forced the Mongol soldiers to remain crowded on ships for weeks. Disease spread. Supplies ran low. The fleets were already in serious trouble before the weather struck. The divine wind finished something. That Japanese resistance had already started. Here's something that almost nobody mentions when the Mongol invasions come up. The pirates who operated across East Asian waters in the centuries that followed, the so-called Wako, were not simply Japanese raiders. They were multi-ethnic networks of smugglers, merchants, and fighters. By the 16th century, many of the groups being labeled Japanese pirates by Chinese authorities were actually largely Chinese. The category was political as much as it was descriptive. The sea lanes of East Asia were operated by people who didn't fit neatly into any one nation's story about itself. In 1543, a Portuguese ship landed at the island of Tanegashima in southern Japan, and the firearms on board changed everything. Japanese craftsmen examined the guns and immediately began trying to replicate them. They could reproduce almost the entire mechanism, except for one part. The screw that sealed the barrel was a threading technique they hadn't encountered before. Once they solved that single problem, domestic production of firearms spread across Japan with extraordinary speed. Within decades, Japan had more guns per capita than almost anywhere else on Earth. The country that supposedly closed itself off to the world had just industrialized weapons manufacturing based on a single foreign introduction. And here's the open loop I promised you at the start, the detail that reframes everything about Japan's so-called isolation. Hold on to it. We're getting there. 12 years before Japan's most famous warlord, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, launched his invasions of Korea in 1592, 4 teenage boys from Kyushu set sail for Europe. They were Christian converts, and they carried letters from Japanese lords to the Pope. They crossed India, rounded Africa, traveled through Portugal and Spain, and reached Rome in 1585. They met Pope Gregory XIII. They attended his funeral. They later met Pope Sixtus V. These 4 teenagers from Kyushu shook hands with 2 popes, toured the courts of Renaissance Europe, and returned to Japan in 1590. Japan was not a world apart. It was a participant. Hideyoshi's Korean invasions, which began in 1592, are remembered in Japan mostly for the military campaigns. But they had a cultural consequence that lasted for centuries. Japanese forces forcibly relocated Korean artisans, particularly potters, back to Japan. Those craftspeople, working under duress in a foreign country, established ceramic traditions and helped launch Japan's early porcelain industry. Some of the most celebrated pottery lineages in Japanese history trace directly back to those Korean artisans who had no choice in the matter. Now we reach the period that popular history calls Japan's Great Isolation, the Sakoku era. And here's the thing, it wasn't isolation. It was controlled access. The Daisen Kofen is ranked as one of the world's 3 largest tumuli, but Japan's foreign policy was similarly massive in what it concealed. Chinese and Dutch merchants traded through Nagasaki. Korea maintained a connection through the island of Tsushima. The Ryukyu Kingdom, modern Okinawa, operated as a gateway through the Satsuma domain. The Ainu world in the north connected through Matsumi. For international gateways, all carefully managed, all producing revenue and intelligence. Sakoku was not a wall. It was a filter. Through the Dutch connection at Nagasaki, Japanese scholars accessed European science through a field called Rangaku, Dutch learning. They studied anatomy, astronomy, geography, medicine, and physics. They built electrical generators. They understood steam engines. When American Commodore Perry arrived with his steamships in 1853 and fired blanks to intimidate the Japanese government, educated Japanese officials already knew what a steam engine was. Perry's black ships were a psychological operation aimed at people who were less ignorant than he assumed. Meanwhile, inside Japan, the system that kept regional lords in check was accidentally creating something else entirely. The Sankinkotai system forced daimyo to maintain residences in Edo and travel there regularly with enormous entourages. This was expensive, politically draining, and economically transformative. The highways needed to support all that movement filled with inns, restaurants, and travelers. Domestic tourism was born as a side effect of political control. Edo's economy was doing other remarkable things. The city had developed what might be the most sophisticated recycling system in pre-industrial history. Households and landlords sold human waste, night soil, to farmers as fertilizer, and farmers sometimes competed aggressively for collection rights. Old paper, broken umbrellas, worn sandals, there were specialized traders for all of it. Edo generated almost no landfill waste because everything had a buyer. This was not primitive. It was a functioning circular economy centuries before the concept had a name. And while Edo's merchants were trading rice futures, Osaka's Dojima Rice Exchange developed standardized futures contracts that were officially recognized in 1730, making it arguably the world's first institutional futures exchange. The political world was about to be turned upside down. When the Meiji government came to power after 1868, it sent one of the most ambitious diplomatic missions in history. The Iwakura mission of 1871 dispatched over 100 officials to study the United States and Europe, with the goal of understanding how the West had industrialized so rapidly. Among the delegation were 5 young girls sent to study abroad. The youngest was Suda Yumiko, who was 6 years old when she left Japan. She spent 11 years in the United States, returned, and eventually founded what became Suda University, one of Japan's pioneering institutions of women's higher education. A 6-year-old girl, sent across the Pacific as a national experiment, who came back and changed the country. The Meiji modernization had a darker side that runs parallel to everything else happening in this period. The government turned its attention to Hokkaido in the north, territory long inhabited by the Ainu people. Using American advisors and promoting Japanese agricultural settlement, the government opened Hokkaido to colonization. The Ainu were dispossessed of their land. Their language was suppressed. Their customs were banned. The story of Japanese modernization is also a story of indigenous displacement that rarely makes it into the international version of events. In 1923, the Great Kanto earthquake struck the Tokyo region and killed an estimated 100,000 people. What followed in the chaos was something that had nothing to do with the earthquake itself. False rumors spread that Koreans were poisoning wells and setting fires. Vigilante groups, and in some cases police and soldiers, killed thousands of Koreans, along with Chinese people, socialists, and Japanese citizens who were mistaken for foreigners. The earthquake was a natural disaster. What happened in its aftermath was not. And then, in August of 1945, as Japan faced surrender, a group of military officers attempted to stop it. On the night of August 14th and 15th, rebels occupied parts of the Imperial Palace and searched for the recordings of Emperor Hirohito's surrender broadcast, hoping to destroy them before they could be aired. They failed to find where the recordings were hidden. The broadcast went out the next morning. The war ended, but only barely, because a small group of men spent the night tearing through a palace looking for a record that would have changed history if they'd found it. In the occupation that followed, a 22-year-old American woman named Beate Sirota Gordon played a central role in drafting Article 24 of Japan's new constitution, the article that established equality within marriage and family law. She had grown up in Japan, spoke Japanese, and understood what women in the country actually faced. The constitutional guarantee of gender equality in post-war Japan was written largely by a young woman who was technically a civilian employee of the occupation staff. Japan's post-war economic recovery is often described as a miracle, but it had a very specific catalyst. The Korean War began in 1950, and Japan became the principal supply depot for United Nations forces. American orders for vehicles, repairs, equipment, and supplies flooded into Japanese industry and injected capital that accelerated recovery at a pace no domestic policy alone could have achieved. Japan's economic miracle was partly funded by a war being fought on the peninsula that had contributed so much to Japan's earliest history. The bullet train, the Shinkansen, which opened in 1964. Is one of Japan's most celebrated achievements, a symbol of technological modernity. But it had a pre-war ancestor. A project called Dangon Resha, literally, bullet train, was planned during the imperial era, partly as the Japanese section of a larger imperial transport network stretching across the continent. Some of the land acquired and infrastructure built for that project was later incorporated directly into the Shinkansen. The symbol of post-war Japan was partly built on the bones of Imperial Japan. And finally, this. In 1972, Okinawa was returned to Japanese administration after decades of American control. During that time, Okinawa had driven on the right side of the road, as Americans do. Japan drives on the left. On July 30, 1978, Okinawa switched. Roads were redesigned. Signs were replaced. Buses were reconfigured. The entire traffic system of an island flipped direction in a single night, 8 hours, and the next morning, people drove on the left. It worked. That's the kind of thing Japan actually does. Not slow, reluctant change. Rapid, total, organized transformation, when the decision has been made. And that brings us back to the thing I told you to hold on to. The gold seal. In 57 CE, a Chinese emperor gave a tiny gold seal to the ruler of Nara, an early state in Japan, the earliest diplomatic record between China and Japan. It disappeared entirely. Then, in 1784, a farmer in Kyushu was doing agricultural work and dug it up. One of the oldest diplomatic objects in Japanese history had been sitting in a field for over 1,000 years. Japan's entire story is like that seal. Buried under a simpler version of itself. The country that supposedly closed its doors was trading through 4 gateways. The country that supposedly invented its culture whole was built by migrants from the Korean peninsula. The country that supposedly defeated the Mongols with divine wind had already been fighting them hard before the storm arrived. The country of samurai had a shaman queen the samurai never mentioned. And the country of post-war rebirth was rebuilding on foundations that stretched back through imperial ambition, colonial violence, and a 6-year-old girl on a ship to America. 2,000 years. None of it is what you were told. And almost all of it is more interesting than the version you already knew. If this kind of history is what you're here for, the details that don't make it into the textbooks, hit subscribe, because there's a lot more where this came from. And if you want to keep going right now, the video on the side covers another civilization whose real history looks almost nothing like the popular version. Drop a comment telling me which part of this surprised you most. I read them, and the answers always tell me what to cover next.